In the 18th century, the world of medicine was a realm of pain. Every operation was torture. Surgery meant screams, blood, and almost always an agonizing death from shock or infection. Few survived. There was no hope. Yet in Japan, during the Edo period, a man dared to defy this cruel reality. His name was Seishu Hanaoka. He was a surgeon who witnessed the unbearable suffering of his patients. He saw their despair, and he vowed to find a way out. He dedicated 30 years of his life to creating a means to put pain to sleep. He had no access to European knowledge or instruments. He studied ancient Chinese texts, experimented with herbs, and repeated attempts hundreds of times. He risked everything, and he succeeded. He created tsusen-san, the world's first general anesthetic. In 1805, Seishu Hanaoka performed the world's first surgery under general anesthesia, a mastectomy for breast cancer. This was 40 years before ether was discovered in the West. He became a pioneer whose methods were decades ahead of their time. His school trained thousands of doctors, spreading knowledge throughout Japan. But behind this astonishing breakthrough lay a terrible price. A price rarely mentioned in history books. A price paid with pain and unimaginable sacrifice. We tend to think of great discoveries as instantaneous flashes of genius, sudden epiphanies. This is a lie. True progress is years of agonizing labor, hundreds of failures, and often unimaginable personal sacrifices. Seishu Hanaoka's story is living proof of this. It is a story not of easy triumph, but of a path paved with despair, pain, and the monstrous cost of human progress. In those centuries, when humanity was just beginning to understand its own body, medicine remained shackled by medieval notions. Doctors did not understand anatomy, nor did they know about blood circulation or the nervous system. Microbes were invisible killers whose existence was inconceivable. Any attempt to intervene in the body became a ritual full of suffering and almost inevitable failure. Surgery was not salvation, but a last resort, a death sentence. Wounds were doused with boiling oil or cauterized with red-hot irons, believing this would cleanse the flesh of evil humors. Pus flowing from wounds was considered a praiseworthy sign of recovery, not a harbinger of imminent and agonizing death from sepsis. Mortality after such operations reached an incredible 90%. 9 out of 10 patients who dared to undergo them did not survive. Their bodies gave out, their screams faded, giving way to the silence of a morgue overflowing with fear and despair. This horror was not unique to the East. From the streets of Edo to the hospitals of London, from Parisian clinics to the most remote villages, the same bleak reality prevailed everywhere. Pain was the universal language of surgery. It was inevitable, expected, accepted as part of the process, as an unavoidable price for an ephemeral chance at survival. Patients, exhausted by illness, often refused surgery, preferring a slow but less agonizing death to the instant hell of the operating table. Their choice was understandable. Better to die in one's bed than under a knife that brought only agony. Dogmas were stronger than steel, and authorities unshakable. For centuries, doctors relied on outdated treatises, passing down practices based on profound misconceptions from generation to generation. Any deviation from this ancient knowledge was considered heresy, a threat to the foundations of the entire medical community. No one questioned this order. No one sought another path. Despair was total. Patients came to surgeons knowing that what awaited them was not treatment, but torture, and that their chances of salvation were negligible. The outcome was predetermined. This was a world where pain reigned supreme and hope died first, buried under layers of ignorance, suffering, and inescapable terror. In the heart of this darkness, in Edo period Japan, a man was born who refused to submit. His name was Seishu Hanaoka. The son of a doctor from Ki province, he saw the bleak reality of medicine from a young age. He saw not just illness, he saw people lose faith, how they refused treatment, preferring a slow but quiet death, how doctors, his own teachers, threw up their hands, powerless to help. Hanaoka studied in the medical schools of the time, absorbing the centuries-old dogmas passed down through generations. He learned methods that brought only torment. He, a young surgeon himself, stood at the operating table where the same tragedy repeated itself every time. He heard the screams. He saw the agony. He felt the helplessness. This was not abstract knowledge from books. This was a reality that tormented him daily. Patients he tried to save died from shock, from infections, from the treatment process itself. He saw their eyes, full of hope, turn to despair, and then extinguish forever. Tradition dictated, pain is part of the process. It's the price for a chance, it's a test. But for Hanaoka, it was not a test, but a sentence. He saw how even the strongest spirits broke under the knife, how their bodies convulsed, how their minds left them even before they lost consciousness. He studied old texts, but found no answers. No treatise, no authority offered a solution. All they did was confirm, such is fate. But Hanaoka did not believe in fate if that fate meant agony. He could not just stand by and watch. He could not be part of this inhumane routine. His duty as a doctor, his conscience, cried out for something different. Within the walls of the hospital, where tragedies unfolded daily, Seishu Hanaoka made a decision. He vowed to change this world. He vowed to find a way to put pain to sleep. He knew he was going against everything considered right, against centuries of tradition, against authorities. But he saw the alternative, more suffering, more deaths. And that choice was impossible for him. He delved into ancient treatises, not those that conveyed dogmas, but those that preserved forgotten knowledge. He was particularly interested in scrolls from China. There, 1,000 years ago, the legendary physician Hua Tuo was said to have used a mafei-san, a potion that put the patient to sleep before surgery. This knowledge had long been lost. It was considered a myth. No one believed in its existence. But Hanaoka believed. He sought the key to the secret hidden in the ages. He knew somewhere in those ancient scrolls lay the answer. He began his work. Hundreds of plants, thousands of mixtures. Every day his laboratory essentially became a battlefield. He ground roots, leaves, seeds, evaporated decoctions, infused elixirs, fought with poisons. Searched for that fine line between death and salvation. Every blade of grass, every drop, was subjected to meticulous analysis. He became not just a surgeon, he became a botanist, a chemist, a toxicologist, and a guinea pig. Every day, a new experiment, a new danger. He risked his health, his life, tested doses, studied reactions. Sometimes he suffered convulsions. Sometimes he lost consciousness. But he did not give up. His will was stronger than steel. One day, while working on a particularly complex compound, he discovered that a key binding oil had run out. It was rare, extracted from a special kind of sandalwood. Without it, the usual formula was impossible. Any other doctor would have stopped, postponed the experiment for months, perhaps forever. But not Hanaoka. He was driven by an impatient thirst for knowledge, the despair he saw in the eyes of his patients. He could not wait. Every minute of delay meant new suffering, new deaths. He made a bold decision, not to wait. Not to retreat, to change the preparation method, to use a different solvent, to alter the proportions. This was a radical departure from traditional methods, a leap into the unknown, a risk that could cost him everything, reputation, health, life. He knew it, but he saw no other way. He gave the new mixture to animals, first cats, then dogs. Tension hung in the air, breath was held, and then the animals fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. Their bodies relaxed. The pain disappeared. They did not react to the strongest stimuli. No prick, no incision, nothing, no screams, no convulsions, only steady breathing, stable heartbeat. This was it, what he had been looking for, not just a pain reliever, but complete oblivion of consciousness, the ability to operate. This was the first decisive step toward victory over centuries of agony. This was the moment when the impossible became tangible. The animals slept. But a human is not an animal. The next step was the most dangerous, to test the medicine on people. Hanaoka understood the risk. He knew that the slightest mistake could cost a life. He needed someone who completely trusted him, someone who understood the stakes, and who was willing to do anything for his great goal. This person was his wife, Kay. She suffered from breast cancer, and she voluntarily offered herself as the first patient. This was not just courage, it was an act of unimaginable devotion. She knew what awaited her, possibly death, possibly unbearable consequences. But she believed in her husband. Hanaoka began. He administered the drug to Kay, observed, recorded every reaction, every tremor, every breath, every heartbeat. He sought that fine line between deep sleep and a lethal dose. It was a dance with death, where the stake was the life of his beloved. Kay fell into a deep sleep. The awakening was terrible. She went blind, forever. The price was paid, an unbearable personal price. Hanaoka was devastated, but he did not break. He did not deviate from his path. He knew her sacrifice must not be in vain. He had to understand why. What went wrong? He returned to work, again and again. He analyzed every mistake, every inaccuracy, changed proportions, sought other components. This was not an instant breakthrough, but years of painstaking work based on the empirical method. He did not rely on old dogmas. He relied on experience, on observation, on constantly learning from his mistakes. His laboratory transformed into a temple of experiment. He kept detailed records. His diaries were filled with the minutest details, dosages, duration of effect, patient reactions, side effects. These records, later compiled by his students, became an invaluable source of knowledge. They were written in his native language, accessible to thousands of Japanese doctors. This was not just a discovery. It was systematization, the transmission of knowledge. As tsusen-san was perfected, Hanaoka faced a new problem. Traditional surgical instruments were not suitable for operations under anesthesia. Now, with the patient not screaming or flinching, incredible precision was required. He began to invent new scalpels, clamps, needles, instruments that allowed him to work with unprecedented delicacy. He didn't just create an anesthetic, he created the conditions for modern surgery. His genius lay in this, in the ability not only to dream of the impossible, but also to methodically, step by step, bring it into reality. In his fearlessness in the face of error, in his willingness to pay any price for knowledge, and in his unwavering faith in the power of observation and experimentation. This was a path not of epiphany, but of persistent, often bloody, labor. The success of tsusen-san was astounding. Patients previously condemned to agonizing death now underwent operations without pain. Rumors of the Japanese surgeon who put people to sleep spread quickly. But not everyone greeted this news with enthusiasm. The old medical world, which for centuries had clung to unquestionable authorities and rituals, saw Hanaoka not as a savior, but as a threat. His methods were too new, too radical. Their indignation was predictable. For centuries, doctors had insisted, pain is purification. Pain is part of healing. It is punishment for sins, a test of will. How could one deprive a person of this? They called tsusen-san a devil's potion, a deception, witchcraft. They claimed it was not treatment, but a dangerous illusion. That Hanaoka was interfering with the divine order, disrupting the natural course of things. They said he deprived the patient of the ability to fight for life, weakened their spirit. That under anesthesia, he might make mistakes that would go unnoticed. Doctors who adhered to traditions wrote denunciations to the authorities. They demanded that his practice be banned, his school closed, and the formula for tsusen-san destroyed. They spread rumors about his failures, about patients who supposedly died from his potion, although in reality, mortality from ordinary operations was tens of times higher. They tried to blacken his name, portray him as a charlatan, a madman. They called him a heretic who encroached on the foundations of medicine, on the very principle of human suffering. Authoritative professors refused to acknowledge his successes, calling them coincidence or the machinations of dark forces. But Hanaoka also had defenders. Not everyone in Japan was blind to the obvious results. Some daimyo, powerful feudal lords, and shogunate officials saw the real benefit. They themselves or their relatives suffered from illnesses. They heard about the miraculous healings in Ki. They needed not dogmas, but living, healthy people. These influential patrons provided Hanaoka with protection. They gave him funds for research. They allowed him to continue his work despite the attacks. They understood this man was not destroying, but creating. He was saving lives. His results spoke for themselves. While traditional surgeons lost 90 out of 100 patients, Hanaoka demonstrated completely different statistics. His operations, performed under anesthesia, had an incomparably higher survival rate. Patients who previously fled the knife now sought help. They saw their neighbors, their relatives, who returned from the hospital alive and relatively healthy. This was not theory, not empty words. These were real people, saved from agony. This fact, more than any treatises or authorities, slowly but surely broke down the wall of prejudice. The struggle for recognition was long and exhausting. Hanaoka didn't just operate. Every day, he defended his right to progress. He proved that compassion and science could go hand in hand. That pain was not a sacred part of the process, but an enemy that needed to be defeated. His school, despite all obstacles, grew. Thousands of students flocked to him to acquire knowledge that changed the very concept of medicine. They carried this knowledge throughout Japan, step by step pulling humanity out of 1,000 years of darkness and suffering. This was not just a scientific discovery. It was a revolution met with hostility by those who clung to the old world. But it could no longer be stopped. But how exactly did this revolution achieve its ultimate victory? Its triumph was not instantaneous. It required undeniable public proof. Rumors of miracles from Ki, of patients returning to life without infernal torment, reached the highest echelons of power, to the very heart of the shogunate. Doctors who had clung to old dogmas for centuries were powerless against the onslaught of living testimonies. Finally, the patience of the supreme officials ran out. Weary of constant deaths and the inefficiency of traditional methods, they demanded clarity. An unprecedented decision was made, an unspoken but comprehensive comparison. Not a trial of Hanaoka, but a trial of pain itself. Representatives of the shogunate, influential daimyo, even some of the most skeptical medical professors were invited to observe. Operations were performed in parallel, one according to old rules, the other under Hanaoka's tsusen-san. Tension hung in the air. In one room, screams, groans, convulsions, blood spilling across the table. Surgeons worked in haste, striving to end the torture. Shock killed before salvation could be achieved. In the other, silence. Only the patient's steady breathing. Hanaoka's calm, precise movements. He worked without rush, with a delicacy previously unimaginable in a world of agony. His hands did not tremble. His gaze was focused. He could operate for as long as needed to perform the work flawlessly. The result was stunning. Where old medicine predicted death, Hanaoka granted life. The survival rate after his operations was incomparably higher. Those who had previously branded him a charlatan now saw irrefutable evidence. Dogmas crumbled not under the pressure of words, but under the weight of saved lives. This day marked a turning point. The shogunate not only recognized tsusen-san, it officially recommended its use. Hanaoka's school received state support. The doors of his hospital opened to thousands of students eager to learn the new medicine. Seishu Hanaoka, who had recently been an outcast challenging centuries of tradition, became a national hero. His name was spoken with reverence. Students spread his knowledge throughout Japan, opening branches of his school, applying his methods in the most remote provinces. He didn't just create an anesthetic, he laid the foundation for all modern surgery in Japan. He changed not only treatment methods, but also the very attitude toward pain, toward the patient, toward medical duty. His methods became the standard, his school, a magnet for the best minds. He proved progress is possible. That compassion and scientific inquiry, supported by years of hard work, can overcome the most terrible suffering. And that true revolution begins not with declarations, but with one person who refuses to accept the world's pain. And this revolution, which began with one man, quickly swept across the entire country. After the shogunate's official endorsement, Seishu Hanaoka's methods were not just recognized, they became the standard. His school in Hiratsuka village, once a humble abode for an innovator, transformed into a national center for medical education. Over the years of his work, more than 200 doctors were trained within its walls, who then returned to their provinces. There, they opened branches, creating an entire network of medical institutions where tsusen-san was used daily. This transformed surgery beyond recognition. If before an operation lasted mere minutes to avoid killing the patient from pain shock, now surgeons could work for hours. Hanaoka and his students began performing complex interventions that were previously unthinkable. They removed breast tumors, resections of which required delicate work with lymph nodes. They performed operations to remove tumors of the jaw, limbs, and even the abdominal cavity. Such procedures, previously fatal, now became routine. Survival statistics literally revolutionized the world of medicine. Where before Hanaoka only 10 out of 100 patients survived, now the percentage of successful outcomes reached 70, and in some cases, even 80%. This was not an improvement, it was a quantum leap. Patients who previously avoided surgeons like the plague now came seeking help. They knew the pain would be put to sleep. The chance of salvation was real. The very attitude toward the human body also changed. If before operating meant interfering with the divine order, now surgery became a precise science. Hanaoka, by his example, showed that knowledge of anatomy, sterile instruments, and anesthesia are the three pillars of new medicine. His students did not merely copy the tsusen-san formula. They adopted his methodical approach, precise records, observation of reactions, constant refinement. They learned not only to operate, but also to think like scientists. The shogunate government actively promoted the dissemination of this knowledge. Doctors trained by Hanaoka received support. Funds were allocated to their hospitals. For the first time in Japan, a unified, standardized system of medical education and practice based on empirical knowledge was created. Before this, each doctor was on their own, relying on fragmented, often contradictory texts. Now there was a common proven protocol. Hanaoka's influence extended far beyond the operating room. He changed public consciousness. The death sentence that surgery was once considered transformed into hope. People began to trust doctors. This trust was an invaluable achievement. It allowed medicine to develop further, to explore new avenues, unconstrained by fear and despair. Seishu Hanaoka didn't just give the world an anesthetic. He gave the world the ability to face illness painlessly. He demonstrated that persistent work, based on observation and experiment, can break down centuries-old barriers of ignorance and suffering. His legacy is not only the tsusen-san formula, but an entire approach to medicine that allowed Japan to surpass the West in this crucial field for many decades. His triumph was not only a personal victory, but also a victory for all humanity over one of its oldest and cruelest torments. Seishu Hanaoka. His name became a symbol. He was the first. The man who dared to challenge the millennium of agony that reigned in the world of surgery. He gave the world the first general anesthetic, tsusen-san. He did this 40 years before ether was discovered in the West. This was not just a scientific discovery, it was a breakthrough that changed the destinies of millions. But behind this astonishing triumph was not an instantaneous flash of genius, not a random epiphany. There was a monstrous price, a price paid with years of exhausting experiments, hundreds of failures, each of which could have been fatal, and a personal tragedy that forever left a deep scar on his soul, but did not break his will. Hanaoka's story is not a fairy tale of easy triumph, but the harsh truth about human progress. He showed true great discovery is not born in a vacuum. It is forged in the fire of suffering, in persistent, often agonizing labor. In the ability to go against centuries of authority, against deeply ingrained notions that pain is an inevitability, even a purification. He fought not only with disease, but also with the inertia of the medical world, with dogmas that had held humanity captive in agony for centuries. He proved the opposite. Pain is the enemy. It must be defeated. This was not just a scientific breakthrough that changed surgical techniques. It was a moral revolution that overturned the understanding of medical duty and human compassion. Hanaoka changed not only surgical methods, making them painless and safer. He changed the very essence of the attitude toward the human body, toward suffering, toward the limits of what is possible in medicine. He laid the foundation for modern Japanese surgery, showed the way when compassion becomes the driving force of science and the empirical method, the only true tool of knowledge. His legacy is not only the formula of an ancient remedy passed on to thousands of students. It is an eternal reminder humanity's most significant victories are won not by the force of arms, but by the strength of spirit, not in an instant enlightenment, but in decades of persistent, often invisible labor, and always at the cost of immense sacrifices. He was a man who, seeing the suffering of the world, refused to accept it, and by doing so, he changed it forever.